The morning started like any other. I was standing on my porch, drinking coffee, when I heard the sound of chainsaws coming from the road. At first, I thought the utility company was doing routine maintenance. Then I saw the trucks. 3 work trucks were parked along the edge of my property, and a crew was preparing to cut the power lines running toward my house. I walked outside and asked the crew supervisor what was going on. He barely looked at me. He said, "We've been hired by the HOA. These lines are unauthorized, and they're coming down today." I stared at him. Those power lines weren't unauthorized. They had been serving my property for years. I told him to stop. Instead, he pulled out a work order with the HOA president's signature. Apparently, the HOA had decided that the utility lines crossed what they considered common property, and somehow they believed they had the authority to remove them. I immediately called the HOA president. She answered with complete confidence. She said, "You were warned. The neighborhood cannot have private utility infrastructure running through HOA property." I asked her one simple question. "Did you check who owns the utility infrastructure?" There was a long pause. Then she said, "The utility company does." I smiled. "That's correct." Then I told her something she clearly wasn't expecting. "I own the utility company." She laughed. She actually laughed. She thought I was joking. But I wasn't. Years earlier, my family had acquired the small regional utility company that serviced several rural properties in the area. The company owned the lines, poles, transformers, and related equipment, and those exact power lines were part of its system. The HOA had hired a private crew to destroy infrastructure belonging to a company they didn't even realize I owned. The crew supervisor suddenly looked nervous. He asked me for proof. I opened my phone and showed him the company registration, ownership documents, and property records. His expression changed immediately. He stepped away from the chainsaw. Then he called his office. Within minutes, the crew was packing up, but the HOA president wasn't finished. She demanded that I remove the lines anyway. So I told her we'd settle the matter through the proper legal channels. That afternoon, my attorney sent the HOA a formal notice. It explained exactly who owned the infrastructure and warned them not to interfere with the utility system again. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. Several board members had apparently never been told the full story. When they learned that the crew had been hired without verifying ownership, they were furious. One board member asked the president, "Did you even check the records?" She had no answer. Then came the final twist. The original property documents showed that the utility corridor had existed long before the HOA was created. In other words, the HOA wasn't just wrong about the power lines. Their authority over that corridor had never existed in the first place. The crew had been hired based on an assumption, and that assumption nearly caused a massive legal and electrical disaster. A few days later, the HOA sent me a written apology and confirmed that no one would interfere with the utility infrastructure again. I never had to threaten anyone. I never had to shut anything down. I simply showed them the records. And that was enough. The biggest lesson was simple. Before you tell someone to cut a power line, check who owns it. Because sometimes the person standing on the porch isn't just a homeowner. Sometimes they're the owner of the company keeping the entire neighborhood powered. If you enjoyed this HOA story, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.